All right, society. I know it's kind of, God, it's almost becoming cliche to just start a new series on this channel, but gonna do it again. As I brought up before, the first episode, at least the first 5 minutes or so of every first episode, tends to generally be an explanation of what I'm trying to do with this new series. In this new series of society, this one's, if not simple, it's simple in its desire, if not its execution, I guess is what I could say. It's that I'm going to attempt to figure out how to define a utopia. More or less. I'm going to try and figure out what an ideal society would have and what it wouldn't have, and how it would cope with the natural state of human beings. This might, I might refer you to different philosophy episodes as time goes on to explain why I say certain things, like you have to compensate for X factor because people are just naturally going to have X factor, and ideally you wouldn't have to, but we're working with an ideal human society, not an ideal perfect people society, whatever, we're human beings, which I also talk about in my philosophy show. I don't know why I'm plugging that show, but you know, these two are going to get tied together a bit. At least this one to that one. I think philosophy can go a bit independently, but this one will have to. Anyways, so for this first episode of Society, I am going to be trying to define what a for this first few episodes, anyways, I'll try and define some fundamental factors about what a society which is, if not necessarily a straight utopia, certainly utopic or utopia would need. And first thing, and I think one of the most, if not the most fundamental thing, is that it would have to be actively changing, or at least evolving with its people. To be fair, it could be on a cycle. If you're imagining a computer-run society, we set up some super intelligence which exists effectively for the sole purpose of making it so human society runs perfectly well, and we just tell it to, like, basically put us through 10,000 years of history and then loop it. That could work, I think, as a society, but it would still have to change. I think that robot society might actually work, even if it's not utopic on the outside looking. I think looking from the perspective of the citizens within that system, that could work, although it would have to be a utopia in other ways. And that would be harder to create a utopia that way. But I think that if a utopia, if it is a society which not only stays the same, but actively, whose people actively intend to keep it the same, it will inevitably fail, or at least it will only be a utopia for the most infinitesimal moment. It could be a utopia, but only for less than a human is able to comprehend time. In fact, it would be considered a no time, I guess, in that it would be a time which is existent, but so infinitesimally small that you can't consider it as, that considering it as any length would be to overestimate it. You would have a single no time of utopia in that society. So it has to constantly change and evolve. At the same time, though, it has to remain the same, or at least it has to remain conservative in its changing of things. It has to, well, more or less, it has to have its conservatives. It has to have those individuals within it who actively intend to keep it within its traditional methods. That's not to say that they succeed necessarily, nor that the liberals who intend to evolve it more quickly would succeed either. It's more that it's a tie between them, that the society actively changes for its people, but slow enough that its people have and are actively changing at the same rate as the society. Which I should draw the line. I'm not saying the society as the group of people. I'm saying the society as the systems in which the groups of people function. just to understand what I mean here. So the society would have to actively change, but I think inevitably people's attitudes actively change at a certain rate. I couldn't really measure it if you asked me to, but I think people's views actively change, but they change at a slow enough rate that if a society, even if a society actively, with 100% acceptance by its members, decides to drastically change something, its people won't be thinking in that method for at least some years to come. And that's a perfect ideal situation. I think that in reality it would take at least a decade for society to change in some major way, and that's under extreme situations. In which case it couldn't really be a society or a utopic society, because there would be that problem which is forcing them to change would be too active within it. Yeah. So I suppose that's a solid first episode for society. Societies have to change in order to be ideal, but at the same time they have to remain the same. They have to only change at the rate their citizenry changes their views. The society cannot outpace, nor can it actually underpace its citizenry, because as soon as it starts outpacing them, it stops representing them as much, and a society has to completely represent its people in order to be a utopic society. And by the way, when I say the systems in which people function, that's not necessarily governance. That could also be just the gossip circles that run a small town. That would be the society of the small town. It's not actually the people, it's the gossip which spreads around them and gets them to actively make decisions about what they're all going to do. So the society cannot, if it outpaces the people, it stops representing them as well, and that makes it no longer utopic or even vaguely ideal. The problem is if it underpaces them and it doesn't change as fast as they're changing, at least as the majority of them are changing, it then starts to also not represent them, but in the opposite way. It starts to become the enemy rather than the idealistic child of a society. It's not the idealistic child who wants to help everyone style society. It becomes the old grumpy man who refuses to conform to modern views and ideals. And both of those societies, neither one is worse. It's just that neither one represents the people who live within it, and inevitably becomes unideal. And if it continues for long enough, becomes not a society at all, because the people within it are so displeased with it that they cease to remain inside of it, and then that's not the society. It just dies, I suppose is the best way to say that. That is, just ceases to exist as its society. So yeah, enjoy the probably generalized outro.